Started. I call the meeting to order. Good evening. Joe, could you help us with introductions?
Of course, thank you, Chair. Welcome, everyone. I just want to do a quick reminder, tonight's meeting is a hybrid format, so most of us are here, but there may be some folks online. It is also being recorded, just as a reminder. So let's start with introductions. Let's start with the commission members first.
Good evening. I'm Alexander Fan, serving as your chair and representing District 1.
Oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
guess I'm on the commission, but I'm not voting.
Well, that's right.
So, hi, I'm Diane. Getting rich into this. It's great to see everyone this evening.
Stu Peterson, I'm the business guy in District 2.
Hi, Elaine Stewart, Environment Rep.
Ramesh Krishnamurthy, District 2.
Ashley Burrell, I'm business rep.
George Marsh, Ag 1.
Amy Haugen, District 4.
Alan Jesse, Agriculture 2. Excellent. So now we'll shift to CWS staff. Start to my right.
I'm Jody Newcomb.
And Joe Gall, the Chief Utility Relations Officer for the district. Let's go to the back.
Canada Evans, Community Committee.
I'm the Chief Business Operations Officer.
Stephanie Lear, Chief Financial Officer.
Tracy Rainey, Government Relations Manager.
Stephanie? She's looking for Katie.
And good evening, I'm Stephanie Morris.
Ashley, I want to certainly welcome you as your first meeting here and our newest members from Intel, and hopefully at some point maybe hear a little bit about your background. So, back to you, Ashley.
Thank you, Joe. Stephanie, I don't see anyone online. Is that right? So no guests we need to announce online?
And we do not have guests right now, but I would like to point out that I had a registration submitted by Nellie McAdams of the Farmland First. So we do expect her to join us virtually this evening. I spoke with her recently. She said she'll pop into the meeting as quickly as she can after 6:30.
After 6:30, okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but when she does step in, if it's mid-meeting, are we going to kind of pause at that point, or do we have her wait till the end?
What do you think?
Yeah, she has very small children.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd like to be mindful of that. Yeah.
Okay, so when Nellie joins our meeting, we'll just take pause from where we are in the agenda, and we'll then switch to public comment period where we'll invite Nellie to speak. And then we'll transition back to the scheduled event. Sound good?
Excellent.
Perfect.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that update.
At this time, I'd like the committee to review and make sure we approve of the March meeting minutes. Questions about the March meeting or? Seeing no questions, I move that we approve the March meeting minutes. You have a match second. Those in favor? Thank you. Items have been accepted. Next in our agenda, we're going to invite Kathy to come up to give us some Budget 101 training.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Kathy Lear, Chief Financial Officer and Budget Officer for Clean Water Services. I'm going to give a little overview of Budget 101, coming up to budget season and the budget committee and hearings in the next couple of months. As you might remember, when I came here in January, we talked about the budget committee. It's made up of 5 members from the board of directors for Clean Water Services and 5 community representatives which come from appointed from CWAC. So the presentation today, we're first going to talk about budget committee role. And then I'm going to give you an idea of what the budget process and the budget meeting looks like by going through the 24. Some of the slides are very similar to what you've seen in 25. We did in 24, talking a little bit about the budget drivers that help develop the budget, your revenues included in that budget, and those expenditures that were there in 24. And then talk about the budget schedule for this year coming up for 25. So the responsibility and role of the budget committee, first thing they do is they elect a presiding officer over that committee meeting to run the meeting itself. Participating in the budget meeting, part of the committee, but at that time also receiving the budget message from the staff district. You also have the opportunity to hear any public comment, if any. And then you finally you're deliberating and you're making a motion to approve a budget of expenditures and recommending the adoption of that by the board of directors at a hearing that happens in June. The budget committee has a lot of authority. They have the ability to amend the proposed budget based on deliberation of the group and the public, or the ability to adopt or approve as proposed the budget itself. So when we put together the 24 budget, we had some key budget drivers that helped define the costs and explain some of the cost increases that happened in that budget year. There were three areas in the business environment, regulatory, and people strategy. On the business environment side, it really related to some of the supply chain challenges we were still seeing from the COVID impact that were resulting in increased material and equipment costs. We also were seeing higher costs on bids and construction due to labor and material constraints, and then overarching inflationary pressures on chemical, utility, and other material costs. So really hitting our construction and M&S budget. On the regulatory side, we talked about, we issued a new permit in 2023. It included some increased monitoring compliance standards that added some expenditures for us in the budget, and any temperature and climate changes that impact permit also could impact material and equipment buys. On the people strategy side, it's a pretty competitive market out there, and so trying to it's hard to get talent. So we put in place in that budget some implemented some people strategy that included, some modified pay structures and some added positions within the groups. We always show this graph as part of our presentation, so you'll see it again this year. It's a great representation of the current revenues coming in, so the bill coming in 24, and how we use those to meet our operating capital and debt needs. So in 24, we budgeted $218.4 million in current revenues. We're putting $128.5 million into operating and other outlays, $19 million in debt, and 86.8 in capital infrastructure investments. And you might notice that in the current year, expenditures exceed current year revenues in this scenario by about $15.9 million. And this reflects the planned use of SDC revenue and rate revenue to meet current capital construction programs. If you're following in your slides, this is slide 6, and the title on it's different now. It said, I think, fiscal year 22-23 revenue trends, but I thought a better representation of this was just revenue trends. This gives you an idea of, when we put the budget document together, what we provide for as a resource to someone reviewing it. We always provide 2 years of actuals, the revised budget for the current year, and then the proposed budget that you would be delivering on. For the revised budget, what that means is that was the adopted budget for 23, but during the year we did mid-year board approved budget transfers and appropriation changes. So that's a revised budget from what was approved. And as you can see, obviously service charges are our main source of revenue. In 24, we budgeted that at $177.2 million, or 81% of our total current revenues. Following behind that is system development charges as our second largest at $27.6 million, or 13% of our total current revenues. And then we have some other resources. Interest earnings at 6.96. We had Build America bond subsidies. If you don't know what that is, we issued 2010 Build America bonds that are taxable bonds, and to receive the savings that you normally would as a nonprofit or government agency. You received a subsidy from the federal government, about 30% of interest payments during the year. And then under miscellaneous fees, we have 6.6 million, or excuse me, 5.8 million, And that includes like various fees, grants, contributions, and then contributions from developers in cities that we do construction work in. So as part of the review of rates, one of the other items that's brought as part of the budget committee is our proposed rate increases for the year. So in 24, we set rates for both regional and local. So we had a proposed 4% rate increase for regional and local sanitary sewer and 4% for the regional and local stormwater service fees. On the SDC side, our rates are set at this point, and the only increases we can do at this point are related to inflation. So the SDC increase in this year was based on the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index as of March of 2023. Then it was at 3%. So that's where you see sanitary sewer went up $199 to $6,824, and the swim SDC went up by 19 to 660. You know, the district strives to keep rate increases reasonable and predictable, and the goal is to avoid rate spikes. We do prepare a 10-year financial forecast where we balance planned operating capital and debt funding with planned rate increases. We're right now in the process of finalizing an updated cost of service study that's going to do a really good job and provide transparency in the cost of sanitary and sewer utilities, but also that regional and local component. So we're hoping that in future budget periods, our rate increases will be based on it, that a roadmap from that study. You'll also see in the budget document, we always provide this just to kind of show that reasonable rate increases over time. We give a 10-year average of increases in rates, and in 24, that was at 3.41%. Similarly on rates, we provide a schedule giving you an idea of how our rates compare to others in the region. In 24, our combined monthly sanitary and swim rate was at $62.50 for a residential customer. As you can see, we compare favorably with others in the region, even though we, in most cases, provide service at a higher level of treatment. So we, during the process, we talk about revenues, but then obviously we talk about expenditures. The slide that you have, I think you had fiscal year 23, 24 on it, expenditure trends, but I changed that to expenditure trends. Similarly to the revenue side, this is really giving you an idea of historical and proposed expenditures. Once again, we do 2 years of actual in the budget document, the current year revised, and then what we're proposing to adopt in that year. The departmental expenses, that includes labor and benefits, along with materials and services for operations. In 2024, that was proposed and adopted at $117 million. Capital construction costs budgeted $86.8 million. And then within that, you know, the district does prepare a 5 in a 10-year capital improvement plan. In order to, and based on our master planning and prioritize and focuses on regulatory compliance. The budget committee this year will be getting a book, and we do produce a book every year that gives you that 5-year capital plan for sanitary and storm, and gives you a lot of detail on the capital projects we're going to be putting in, if we plan to construct. And this year we'll be providing that document at the budget committee meeting for the members. Just to be aware that departmental and capital expenditures, they make up 87% of the current budget. When you're looking at other outlays at 11.5 million, that includes utility, the bad debt expense. It has a whole bunch of various items in it. Franchise fees that we collect and remit to the cities, equipment purchases, a pass-through of local industrial flow and right-of-way to cities, and any mid-year plan adjustments. And you might notice there in 22, there was a spike in that category, and that really related to a $39 million payment to escrow to refund our 2011B revenue bonds that allowed the district to save just over $6 million in future interest payments. So this graphic really shows you on the operating side, how our resources are spent in our priority within the budget. Obviously, we spent 32 million. One of our largest programs is the water resource recovery budget for 24, followed closely by the utility operations and services at 15.8 million. And that really relates to conveyance engineering and field operations for in 24. It really shows you how they all play out in expenditure and budget. During the budget committee meeting, a staff member that will represent each of these programs, and they're going to present on the drivers within their department program budget, and initiatives within their roadmap. So similarly, in the budget in 24 for departmental, which is the labor and resources services, had at 117 million mentioned. That was a 16.7% increase over the prior year. Personal services went up 17.7%. And similarly, we talked about these personal strategy drivers that were impacting our budget. That's where you see some of that cost increase. We added 9 new positions, including converting 5 long-term temporary to full-time. We also changed the pay structure as part of the new union agreement, and we just to promote employee recruitment and retention for the organization. On the material services side, a 14.8% increase. Once again, some of those drivers, business and regulatory. We saw regulatory compliance, inflation and supply chain increases, increased our chemical and energy costs for the district in the budget. We also saw on the contract and professional services, some of that toughness of recruitment. We kind of bridged some of those vacancies and positions with contract labor as we tried to fill those open positions. And then some of the other areas where we saw some cost increases, insurance costs due to our add of cybersecurity coverage, and then also valuation increase in the general water recovery facility. We also saw some software licensing increases due to investment technology, and you're going to see that again in 25. That's pretty common thing. That the budget committee schedule. So April 19th, the proposed budget is going to be distributed to the committee members, but it's also going to be available online. So anybody on CWAC is able to go out on our site and later in the afternoon and access that document if you'd like to look at the proposed budget. May 9th, we're going to have the budget committee meeting at the Washington County Public Services Building at 9 a.m. It's usually a full day process to deliberate. And then June 18th, they take that approved budget to the board for a public hearing. Once again, where public comment can be made, and then the board adopts that budget. At that same time, they're usually looking at rates and charges updates and for a public hearing, and then also adopting our CIP plan. Before I go to the next slide, were there any questions at all on the, okay.
Okay, you had a pretty big jump in system development charge there. I hate against that.
That is a really volatile area. We always try to budget really conservative because we can't gauge when a big development is going to occur. And 2023, we actually had some significant development in Beaverton and Hillsborough. So the city components coming in, it is really hard. So we do try to budget it conservatively, kind of look at a history and level it.
You don't look at projects that are underway or being planned for or anything like that.
Not normally, no. We really just kind of look at our historical trend, and we're really usually not too far off. There's only once in a while where you get a huge development that goes in, and usually it spans over a few years. So
Like you said, it's a volatile.
it's very volatile. Yeah.
How much did the rate increase go up for next year versus the previous year?
It was 4% of the previous.
I think it's pretty good considering, like PGE and some of those places gone up 12, 15%.
Yeah, we really try to keep those rate increases reasonable and predictable. So we're trying to keep them in those ranges.
Questions? June last year, when you gave this presentation, that was similar one, or is this an update to that saying, this is what we expected, this is what we expect?
Yeah, so the presentation I gave last year was really similar, give you
It's
the
similar.
experience of what a budget committee meeting, what we talk about, what's addressed in the budget document, but that really related to 23 information. And this is then 24 with the current year.
So because for a minute I was saying 23, 24, we were almost up into 21, so are we looking at a preview of 24, 25? That's when it comes up later.
Yeah, so 25 is going to be that proposed document that we present to you on April 19th.
Good, so that's the basis on which I have the following questions. Last time when you spoke, you gave us it was called unplanned expenses and operating and outlay expenses. I think you said we had roughly 25 to 30 million that would be never used in India. That was not, that's where
Where?
my note.
What, and is that what expenditure type?
23, transfer the money from contingency, but increase cost, also strategy, put money in contingency to deliver. Is there a similar situation this year is what I'm.
Yeah, so in non-departmental, we put money in there. So contingency we use for unanticipated expenditures that come to light. So but we requires board approval to move it from contingency up into a expenditure line item. And we always tell that line item is and why. We also budget in non-departmental or other, some monies, because we haven't decided if we're going to move forward with that, or we don't know the amount yet, but we know we might want to move it. So we appropriate it non-departmental, and then during the year, we evaluate what positions we want to bring on, or what initiative we want to go, and we move it out of we take it to the board once again, we move it out of non-departmental up into a appropriated line spend.
Are you going to do the same thing this year or is that?
We will have a similar, yes, number yes, that we could utilize for, in particular, because we have class and comp, non-rep coming up and some unknowns there. And also maybe positions that we looked at, but just weren't sure if we had a business case yet for and wouldn't do unless we had that business case. So we put some money in to give us some flexibility, but it does require the board.
It's going to be the discussion in the budget meeting later.
So we will note those numbers in the budget, but then if we decide to go utilize them, we would go to the board and request that as a budget transfer. And there's a board memo that's done and an RNO that moves them, that would move it once they approve it. And it provides a description of why we're doing it.
Thanks. You had another point where you compared the rate increases or rates for several cities.
Yeah.
You showed that. Can you flip back to that?
Okay, yeah.
This one. So I can see Portland is almost twice the CWS. So what are the key learnings? What's driving their prices that we are not aware
And
of?
just so you're aware, for comparability, we utilize the same water usage that is our system average to make it comparable across all of them. And so Portland, we utilize their base and their use based on our CCF. So, and for them, obviously they have a large construction projects going on, like just today in the paper, you heard about the water purification system. I'm assuming they have costs that they incur to cover, the water meter needs to, and sewer needs to cover. They have a lot of major construction projects themselves. But this particular number is an equivalent based on an EDU and a use. So a customer in Portland might experience a very different rate because their use might be a lot lower.
I'm happy you understood what's driving their cost, because we don't want to be in a situation where we know the price spike is coming, but we are not in visibility. That's where my question is. Looks like you understand the big league projects and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so we try to put our forecast together, plan for debt service when it's appropriate to try to keep those rates stable.
I'm happy to be in series, by the way.
Yeah, we do take great pride in the ability to control our costs because our treatment technology is so much greater than Portland's because of our discharge point is the Tuolumne River. And Portland was really driven by this huge expense that they had to make for the big, they call it the big pipe, because they have combined sewer and stormwater that overflow, and it really impacted them.
And they still haven't fixed it, I mean, they still have, it's not as old as
They have a huge, on the sanitary sewer side, a huge capital program need. And they weren't able to get their rate increases, so now they're struggling to balance their budget. It's, you know, we're fortunate that we're not on that trajectory, and it's a long-term commitment that started with Bill Gaffey.
And
Really
we were expecting like a 64% increase, but for some reason, Portland decided we're not going to. All the costs are not going to be given to everyone or something like that. That's good to know that we have visibility into why that increase and we are not in that part of that kind of surprise. Last question.
Okay.
If she wants to.
Go for it.
You had one foil on people's strategy. Said something about the skills and the increased competition for talent and those things. So I'm trying to understand what are those specific or special skill sets that are either taught or that we have some increased competition for those skill sets. Give us an example of what is it that.
Well, I can tell you in finance and accounting, it is hard to get accounting talent. It is really hard to get. It's been a long haul filling those positions, and we still have a position that's open for fixed assets, which is one of our biggest areas. So I could say that. I don't know, Diane, if you could speak. There's a lot of other.
No, in this region, so our situation was that we were not paying the 6% PERS here at Clean Water Services, and all of our competitors were. So we were handicapped, and with this sort of huge generational change, right, of retirements, everyone's trying to hire an engineer, they're trying to hire finance people, they're trying to hire community engagement, electricians, mechanics, operators. So what ends up happening is we begin poaching from each other. So we're trying to, Clean Water Services needed to levelize itself with our peers. And so the people strategy was just confronting sort of that brutal truth. If an operator here can move to another facility at another treatment plant, and you've just lost all of that knowledge, and our treatment plants are complex. So they can go to a treatment plant that's called a secondary treatment plant that isn't as complex as ours and get paid more. And that's what we were very concerned about. So the big increase we had was to actually get our union wages competitive. And now we're looking at our what we call our non-bargaining. So it's all of the administrative staff. So that study's going on now. But we're not trying to be at the top because Portland pays more than we do. But we're trying to be at that right spot.
It's not paucity of skills, but more of the competitive pay package that we are offering.
Yeah,
That makes.
it's tough in this region because of this retirement. You're all probably feeling the same thing.
Oh, yeah, we recruiting talent's very good.
Thank you for general questions.
I have a few. First off, following up on Stu's question on the system development charges. Is this reflecting an increased reliance on SDCs? And is that a good thing, or what do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's when you look at it versus our service charges, it's a smaller amount, obviously significantly lower. We utilize it wisely on either debt service payment or for reimbursement component of that charge, or for new development that's happening in Fund 212. And I can say that we, in 112, and I can say that we have way more in SDC eligible projects than we utilize SDC revenue.
And so the miscellaneous fees are going down, and
So those fees, we try to be conservative on it because we don't know. In any given year, just like for instance, on the outlay side, we had that escrow payment that really jumped us. We never know in any given year if we're gonna have a huge developer contribution to a project or a big grant that would come in, for instance, which would have been the case in 21 with COVID. So we normally try to look at, once again, like SDCs, we kind of look at historical trending and try to keep our number in line with an average over a period of time, 5 to 10 years. And some years we come in under it, and some years we have unusual expected to come in.
thanks. Circling back to the people strategy, I know you're only a little over a week away from delivering the budget documents to us. I have a question. Forgive me, it's been a while since I went back through and looked at the various roadmaps. But when the budget is discussing the people strategy, is there some DEI information and planning woven into that? Because it's a heck of an opportune time to think about that and ensure that it's incorporated.
And address that specifically. Yeah, so we do have a group that's the Culture, Equity and Learning Group. And they work hand in hand with HR to try to attract more diverse people to clean water services and our water jobs. And they were going to talk about the internships and the apprenticeship program. We're trying to get folks to become operators, electricians, and these are all really big water sector jobs, as well as working in the natural systems group. So we'll take a note of that to make sure we talk about them.
Great, thanks. Those are the only questions.
Well, we added an additional slide that's not in your packet for you. Wanted to have a dialogue and talk a little bit about with CWAC on the budget process, how we can engage you in the process in the future. How would you like that engagement to look? And then also, what can we do to support your understanding of the current proposed budget? The dialogue takes the minutes down. Just any ideas you might have of things that you could do to help engage you in the budget process, or get an understanding of the budget process. Like right now, we do this budget 101, but there are other ways that we could reach out to the group and get input and educate.
And another suggestion or thought is we tend to bring the budget to you at the end. Here's our budget, but we don't necessarily engage you earlier on in developing that budget 6 months or 9 months ahead of time. So do you want to be involved potentially in that way? And we don't have to solve that tonight, but we're trying to get more potential input from you to be more engaged with our budget process earlier, I guess is the question that we talked internally about.
Your first in the budget committee. That involved in that part of the lives. Are you looking for something beyond that?
We're just trying to see how CWAC, so we show our roadmaps. Those roadmaps link to the budget, and we're just sensitive to the fact that we bring you a lot of information, but we want to make sure that you feel engaged in not only the information that we're providing, but also the level of involvement. I mean, this CWAC, the current CWAC is very engaged in what we do. So And for today, you can kind of think about this, as the budget committee members go through the budget process. We'll pose these questions again for you and so the budget.
Shut down. Still once a year, maybe once in 3 months, you can give us a simple one slide. Say, this is what we budgeted, this is where we are. How much did we spend against how much? Just a quick glance to say, and particularly from you, what could stand out from there is, was there something unexpected or was there something that, hey, we did a good job of the jackpot project, like everybody else. I think that's, take it more, being very snapshot.
So kind of the budget to actual reporting.
Something like that. It kind of keeps us in the loop saying, yeah, at least 3 months I can still remember what was told.
One thing I think that might be of interest too is during the year, as we do any budget transfer resolutions, having an awareness of those for the group.
Something like, hey, we didn't expect it, now we're looking at a expense or.
So yeah, so like that non-departmental you just talked about, how did we end up using some of those resources during the year?
That's the exceptions or highlights. You don't need a
Okay.
detail.
Permits to the feds, right, to do this? How volatile is it?
Really pretty steady. We pay permit fees to the Department of Environmental Quality. So they go through their state budget processes and there's a lot of controls that comes from the legislature as it relates.
Federal legislature.
So in terms of the feds, our money actually goes to DEQ because DEQ has what they call primacy. So EPA delegates their authority to the Water Department.
So you're going to state legislators, all right, got it.
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of, so Clean Water Services.
But you're really paying it to the state, and who's then funnels it to the fed. But the feds set the charges, right?
No, so the feds set the standards
Okay,
and then the state has to comply.
got it. That's not volatile.
They're pretty, like this year, I don't think they had a huge ad package, did they? Yes. No, so the legislature really manages DEQ. So Clean Water, and you'll hear it from Tracy, we want to support a DEQ that can be responsive to our needs here.
Well, it's very important because we don't want to have the feds oversee it, right? So that's where it would change is all of a sudden the standards became much stricter and you had to comply with them. That's one of the things, right, that you have to do every year anyway. But if something happened like that, it could be a big deal, right?
And we're gonna talk a little bit about PFAS.
So you'd be able to pass that along to the ratepayers. I mean, that's a legitimate charge.
We tend to try to manage ahead, right? What is our risk potential so the biggest problem with rates is when a utility has not prepared for something. So they're sort of caught where they have to make an expansion in the next 2 or 3 years. So you end up having to raise the rate to be able to pay for that. So
PG. Maybe.
yeah, so we, and Kathy has a slide that shows what's going on in the water industry and some of the peers. So Clean Water Services has taken this approach to be very levelized and to do rate stabilization with our unappropriated balances. We keep it on this glide path. Otherwise, some people are spiking in double digits. We don't want to do that.
But meeting the standards, the rate alterations don't come from fees charged by DEQ, they come from technology and other things that you have to implement. At the facilities.
Yeah, the capital.
Yeah.
So we're already hedging what will happen 20 years from now. Yeah, so we're making sure we're building capital, so when that happens,
You always said you want to be ahead of the standards.
yeah.
That's the question, deal, right? I mean,
Otherwise, you look like Portland. So when they had to do that big fight, they had to sell the bonds to do that. And you see what it did to their rates. It just spikes it. It does.
So something to think about for, as Ramesh was mentioning about periodic updates on budget to actuals, maybe just some sort of a dashboard that could include that, but maybe also, advancement on the roadmaps to where you were trying to get this fiscal year. How are we doing? So some kind of dashboard like that might be interesting.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Performance Excellence Program requires us to do more results reporting, so that could be something really interesting for CWAC to actually engage with us on the data, the dashboards as we create them. That's great.
I remember the other thing. I don't know how often policy comes in, but something I think that would be really interesting. I mean, you do an amazing job educating us about all these different kinds of things that you all do. But if there are places within the budget where there is a policy shift, a policy implementation, something that has a budget impact, if you want feedback on the policy direction, we might be good for that.
A great one is, the legislature was talking about the timing of SDC payments and, some of the ability to finance that. That it would be really great to have the conversation here with CWAC to really help engage.
You got the right person in the room over here. You can tell that's your $36 billion expansion. I presume that's going to be a big windfall for SDCs.
Yeah, we actually calculated what folks would need and does the SDC actually cover the technology? But there's always choices that they can choose to invest in their own facilities.
In exchange for credits.
Or they could, no, it's just that it controls their discharge so that they don't have to pay for sewer capacity and causing expansion. So it's always been a great relationship with Intel to really manage that because they have a wonderful water plant. and technology. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Questions?
One thing you'll probably see, and you'll get the advantage of seeing it in the packet earlier, I think when we're putting presentations together to kind of encourage two-way discussion, is we're gonna have those questions. What kind of questions do we want to engage with? I see that as the standard in all of the presentations. Just encourage more of a two-way conversation rather than one.
Have you contemplated putting a roadmap out of the topics to come forward and maybe at the end of this meeting, ask CWAC, hey, topic A and B are on next month's agenda. Are there things that we should be making sure we are preparing to talk about? Or is there something in particular that anyone would be interested in pulling out? That might be a way to start the dialogue or to have even more back and forth. Yeah.
With that, Tracy, welcome to the stage. Thank you. She's going to give us some state and federal legislative updates.
Thank you for having me. Again, I'm Tracy Rainey, Government Relations Manager for Human Services. Appreciate the time tonight to provide an update on state legislative activities in particular, and a federal update as well, and what we see going into the coming year ahead. So I'll spend most of my time tonight talking about our state legislative priorities, kind of going through each one of those priority items. If you'll recall, I came before CWAC in January, just ahead of the state legislative session to talk about the priorities that had been adopted by our board just in December of this past year. And then we'll again go into a brief update on some of the federal priorities where we are seeing some movement. And then talk about the timeline and the process that we anticipate for developing our 2025 state and federal legislative agendas, which is going to be coming very quickly. So as you know, I'm sure, the state legislative session recently convened and recently adjourned. This is an even number year, so it was a short legislative session. Constitutionally required to adjourn within 35 calendar days, unlike our odd numbered year sessions, which are 160 days. So it's the fast and furious legislative session. They did adjourn a couple days, 3 days earlier than their constitutionally required adjournment date, which is actually pretty unusual for the legislature. They usually like to go right up until that final required constitutional by date. There were close to 300 bills introduced during the short session. Unlike the long legislative session, during the short session, legislators are limited in the number of bills that they can introduce. So that is certainly a dynamic of the short session, is that there's more demand for bills as vehicles for advancing things than there are bills available. So was about the number of bills that we would expect for the long legislative session. We usually expect 2,500 to 3,000 bills introduced. So pretty manageable overall. So interesting, I think that 115 of those bills passed both chambers, House and Senate. That's actually a higher number than I think I would have guessed. It was a session that seemed to be a little bit more cooperative. That's my opinion on how it went. And I think part of that was a reflection of that there were some really big policy issues that had a bit more bipartisan flavor to them. A couple of those issues on there being housing production. It's an area where not everyone agrees on all the specifics and how we're going to approach everything, but generally speaking, that's an issue that has some bipartisan support there. Ultimately, Measure 110 reform. I'm sure that everyone has read about the passage of that reform legislation this session, which was a pretty significant lift and did require working across the aisle. And then campaign finance reform was the other big ticket item for this short legislative session. So considering it was 33 days, they actually were able to get quite a bit accomplished, which is always good to see. So I'm going to jump into our specific priorities that we went into this session with and provide updates on kind of the outcomes associated with each priority. The first item on here is an ongoing priority for us, which is advocating for additional investment in water-related infrastructure. This has been on our legislative agenda for many years and will likely continue to be on our legislative agenda for years to come. We did update this priority last year when we were working with our board to adopt the final agenda to make sure that it reflected the need for not only investments that are related to, of course, water quality protection, protection of public health, aging infrastructure, capacity, those things that we typically think of, but knowing that we were going to have this housing production conversation, making sure that it was very clear that that water infrastructure investment is absolutely critical to supporting that accelerated housing production. So I'm really happy to report that it feels like we are singing kind of the same song as the legislature. I think there is a recognition at this point that investment in water infrastructure is absolutely necessary, and there's a lot of momentum there. So a few bills that are highlighted on this slide. Senate Bill 1537 was the governor's housing bill. That bill did pass. One piece that there's a lot in there, so not going to go through all the different aspects of that bill. But one piece in there I wanted to flag was $3 million that's going to Business Oregon, which is one of our state agencies that does a lot of infrastructure assistance to communities. And they're going to be doing some work to identify, they're going to convene with DLCD, Department of Land Conservation and Development, to figure out how do you prioritize in investments in water infrastructure and other types of infrastructure projects to support housing development. So I think there's a recognition that there's a lot of need out there across communities to make those investments, but they don't yet have a clear understanding of how it is that they're going to go about prioritizing those requests in the future. There was also a revolving loan fund that was included in the governor's bill that would allow for local governments to provide grants to developers. Not something that we would take advantage of, being that we are not a city, county, and we are not in that role really as in that housing space, but something that they did create. So we'll see, I think, how that goes. The other two bills I wanted to flag, Senate Bill 1530 and House Bill 4126, both had specific investments in water-related infrastructure included within them. Over $90 million that was invested for water-related projects that were to accelerate housing production. So again, these are specific community projects that were identified as being shovel ready that would help communities kind of hit the gas pedal, if you will, on delivering those projects. I think one of the conversations that we're having with the legislature that's been really good is about the timing, the timing and the planning that is required. We can't just put a pump station in. That's not a quick and easy task. It's something that we need to have forewarning, be able to plan for. And certainly any additional state investment is helpful when you're dealing with limited budgets and competing needs in that capital improvement plan. Any questions on that before I?
Yeah, the $90 million, does that sort of community received it, are they gonna pay that back with the revenue that they realized from the house production?
That's direct allocation funding, so those are grant dollars.
The grants, huh?
Yeah, so again, the idea being that hopefully they can accelerate the delivery on that infrastructure. And, you know, again, I think another conversation that we're needing to still have, and we had with legislature going into session, was about overall capacity, because not everything in this, in the need in terms of water-related infrastructure investment is site-specific to development, where you can very clearly say, you make this investment, it's going to accelerate this development. For some communities, they may have inflow and infiltration issues where their pipes are leaking so badly that they are out of capacity, essentially. And so some of those system improvements actually can be the key to unlock additional housing development. So that's a conversation that I think the legislature is looking to have. But all of these were very site-specific investments that were grant dollars.
Tracy did try to get a clean water services project funded, but it didn't. But this region got a fair amount of money for the big drinking water pipe project that TBWD has. It's a large infrastructure project, and I think a water pump station.
Yeah, there were a couple projects that were included within this region, and ultimately we also suffered just a little. Not that I'm not a baseball fan, I am very much so, but there was some big requests from Hillsborough Hawks and things. So when they look at the overall picture of geographic funding across the state, there was a lot of money coming into this region. So hopefully next legislative session, there'll be some good opportunities though for us to bring forward potentially some specific project requests.
I think you already answered half of my question. All the 15-37 million doesn't seem like a big amount. And the other one, 90 million that's passed, I was going to ask you, how did it affect the CWS? Was there any that wasn't there? Priorities?
For clean water services specifically within these bills, as related to water related infrastructure investment, no. Aside from, again, I think that they're having a broader conversation. It used to be that as we were talking about infrastructure investment, I would get very excited and then realize they were talking about roads, which I love roads. They're great. They are absolutely necessary as well. Those transportation improvements are wonderful. But frequently water has not been seen in that space where it's the critical component. So again, it's good momentum, nothing specific in this legislative session that was a financial benefit to clean water services. But again, I think the conversation's going in a really promising direction. I do think too, some of the work that is being done, like that $3 million investment, is one where we're going to be engaged in working with Business Oregon. One of the pieces that we'll be watching for specifically is to make sure districts are seen in that space. We are often overlooked. It is often assumed that the infrastructure delivery is coming from a city. And so we are frequently seeing legislation where they missed us. And so we're proactively reaching out, working with Business Oregon just to make sure that they understand the needs of districts across the state as part of that discussion.
The other thing that is important, that really provides the value that Tracy provides, is we're a lot of new faces in the legislature this past session. And next year, in the 25, there's going to be a lot of new faces. So it's this constant education that you can't just sit, oh, they understand it. Well, if you have a bunch of new people in Salem, you're starting from scratch, trying to get them to understand. So that's a lot of the work that Tracy and other governmental affairs folks from cities and the counties collectively, and then organizations like the League of Oregon Cities, to try to educate our legislators about the importance of water infrastructure. It's a constant effort. And we're fortunate to have her. She's helping to move the dial.
We'll talk. Okay, I'm gonna move on to two priorities on this slide. We did have a lot of legislative priorities for short legislative sessions, so I'm gonna move relatively quickly through these. This first item on here, advocating for funding to support a study on PFAS, particular to the fate transport with land application of biosolids. And this is a bill that was introduced by Oregon Association of Clean Water Agencies in 2023, passed out of policy committee, did not pass out of the Ways and Means Budget Committee. The price tag on that bill, it would be Oregon State University that would be doing the study. The price tag went up to $750,000 between 2023 and 2024 as they kind of refined the work and scope that that study would entail. Same thing this session, it got out of the policy committee. There was a little bit more opposition. Actually, we didn't have any in 2023. There was more opposition in 2024, just concerns about making sure that it was understood what was being studied, kind of liability potential issues there. There were amendments to the bill and bill went over to Ways and Means, and just, there was a lot of budget requests this session. There was a lot of asks for funding, and so the bill did not make it through the process. We're in conversations with Oregon Association of Clean Water Agencies to see if they'll plan to bring that bill forward again for the 2021 session. So I'm not sure yet, and we'll keep you updated on that. There may be some other grant opportunities that they might pursue and look at for that funding.
Now, we talked about PFAS in the last meeting also. How does this impact the study is not going to be done?
That's a really good question. PFAS is an issue that we're going to continue to be talking about. You may have seen today that EPA released the drinking water standards, and so we'll down the road there will be standards that will apply to us as related to PFAS. And so again, I think that from our perspective, there's a lot of nationwide data that's being collected, and there are a lot of states that have much more significant levels of PFAS. Those states especially have seen manufacturing facilities, for instance. So it's been important that we have Oregon-specific data that's informing Oregon policy. And that's really where, I think the logic in this bill is to make sure that we have Oregon-specific data. We are doing a lot of the sampling here at the district, and so it's not necessarily an area where I think Clean Water Services felt like we needed to have this funding in order to get the data. But seeing the other communities across the state and trying to paint that statewide picture to inform the policy was something that we were supportive of. I don't know, Diane, did you have any?
Yeah, there's been a movement across the US in some of these areas that have really high PFAS in their wastewater and drinking water to create a ban on the use of biosolids in their states. And we don't want that here in Oregon because our situation is much different than Maine or some of the other locations. Because a ban to biosolids in the land application so we can recycle the fertilizer capacity of it would create a huge need to move technology, which includes incineration. And that just creates other problems, right, with air pollution and et cetera. So this work is so that we make good policy here in the state of Oregon based on real data. And so Clean Water Services already has our data, and want to make sure that we don't have this sort of fear-based decisions that some of the other states do. So we don't want to ban the land application of biosolids.
Thinking, is there other ways to get that funded, or is there other ways to get the data so that we can?
This was to help the other cities, some of the smaller cities, to understand their data. So I think we'll just have to see where Oregon Association of Clean Water Agencies wants to go.
They are looking, yeah, again, for grant dollars where they can find them. And then OSU would very much like to do this work. I think got some really impassioned individuals that are like ready to roll up their sleeves on this. So I think you'll be hearing again on this issue, I would imagine in the future, whether that be a grant funding route or another state legislative request. And maybe it's a combination of the two. It might be a lower legislative request just to see if we can find a sweet spot that the legislature has more appetite for, because close to $1 million is getting to be a price point that they were struggling with on this one. So.
Do you have a motion before?
I don't think so. I think between Diane and Tracy, they covered what I was going to ask. Thanks.
Okay, so I'll move on to the next priority, which is around preserving our local financing tools for water infrastructure, just making sure that we are able to collect the revenue that we need to pay for the infrastructure that we're delivering. So whether that be rates, SDCs, et cetera, there have been conversations the legislature has had around all those pieces where we've done a lot of education and outreach with them so that they understand how it is that we pay for infrastructure. And so the only bill that we saw related this session that was related to system development charges was House Bill 4099. It would have established a voluntary program where local governments could defer the collection of system development charges to certificate of occupancy. And then if those SDCs were not paid by the developer, that the state would pay the local government, and then the state would then engage in collection with the developer. So it would create this fund and kind of reduce down that risk and concern that some communities have shared. The fund would have been $10 million to get the program started. The bill did not pass, again, $10 million, just a lot of budget asks this session. So I'm not sure if that bill will come back the next legislative session. I wouldn't be surprised to see it resurface. Questions on that before I?
Yeah, I don't, what's the point? Yeah, sorry, I don't agree.
On the sewer
You
side,
don't get a permit until you pay the fees.
yeah, on the sewer side, there's an argument that until the building is occupied, there really is no use of the sewer system. That's really sort of the argument. So even though this did not pass, it doesn't mean that it's a policy that isn't worthy of looking at in consideration. So Joe and the team and Tracy were sort of noodling through how you would do that.
I know, yeah, I don't know if that would have been utilized much by jurisdictions. I didn't hear necessarily a lot of jurisdictions saying that they wanted this as a tool per se. But I think that local governments have expressed that they didn't want to withhold a certificate of occupancy if there was some collection challenges. And so in the state certainly wouldn't want to have that be withheld with housing production being such a priority. So I don't know. Again, I'm not sure if this one would have, it definitely wouldn't have solved any of the problems per se, but maybe a couple jurisdictions would have looked at it. So that was the only thing that we saw though on financing succession. This item on this next slide is around water reuse. And this again is another one of our very long-standing priority items that will likely continue to be a long-standing priority item. This is really, I would describe more of an administrative priority for us at this point as a policy as opposed to legislative, because we were able to get legislation passed in 2023 session that was included in the comprehensive drought package that the legislature passed and would provide funding to DEQ to update the regulatory framework for reuse and have those policies geared to better promote reuse projects across the state. So we are coordinating right now with both DEQ and Oregon Association of Clean Water Agencies again, as DEQ looks to hire the positions that were authorized through that funding. But again, for anyone that works in these types of spaces, that's like where the hard work begins, is in that actual regulatory administrative implementation side as they do begin the work to update that framework. And so we'll be engaging in that ongoing. We'll be having discussions about additional tools that may be helpful around reuse for the next legislative session as well. Any questions? I'm sorry.
Did you pass? Did you talk about it?
This bill, that bill passed in 2023. So now it's the administrative side of implementing that framework update.
And the reason why we care is because Oregon's reuse laws are actually probably 20 years behind for the California, the more arid states, right, Texas. So I think there's consensus that Oregon needs to look at this issue, want to encourage it.
Okay, just two more state legislative priorities. So the next priority item that we went into the session with was around water utility responsiveness and resiliency, which is kind of a broader catch-all for any items that we were seeing that would help promote resiliency and responsiveness as a utility. Things like Emerald Ash Borer, for instance, and funding to help support work in that space. We did see two bills, I would say, that did not pass. However, the money that was requested was included in the final budget bill. And so we could almost say that they did pass in essence, they just didn't pass in their bill form and were rolled into a larger budget package. But the first one there for increased funding for Invasive Species Council, $1 million, including funding for education outreach and mitigation activities. Again, that will be really helpful in Emerald Ash Borer and other invasive species work that the departments are doing. And then the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Fund, which has been an existing program that has not been well funded. And $10 million in funding was included for the Department of Ag for that program, which include things like conservation easements and conservation management plan assistance as well. So two really good investments that we saw the legislature make. And our final legislative priority for the state, which was not one that came up during the 2024 session, but that is for additional funding to support low-income household water assistance. We had that bill introduced working with other statewide associations in 2023. The bill ultimately did not pass, but there was language included in that, again, comprehensive drought package that would require legislature to produce a report on the federal assistance that came to the state from 2021, which was about $14 million total, and how that was, how that funding was utilized and kind of where that was a success or where there were challenges. So the legislature can use that to inform future policy decisions. And so this is another item. We did see that in a report that was issued by the Legislative Policy and Research Office in January of 2024, so just before legislative session, which should hopefully kind of keep the conversation alive about potential state investment in that program. There's state investment in the home heating side, but there's never been on the water assistance side for ratepayers.
The one where we heard a story about some Mississippi city in low income. Was this related?
Not related, but certainly, I mean, you could maybe draw some distant lines to, again, I think the challenge that a lot of communities are struggling with, which is increasing rates in a way that is responsible and responsive to your budget needs, but knowing that there are members of the community who are already past that point of affordability for their households. And so trying to figure out how do you make sure that you can support those households that are already struggling with that affordability, so that you can continue to make the investments or see those rates increase responsibly, but providing that assistance. And so we've seen the federal assistance finally. Took a really long time. I mean, it took COVID really for that to come to fruition finally. And so we'll talk about additional federal funding in a minute when we talk about the federal priorities.
This is mainly giving them additional funding support, nothing to do with the infrastructure.
Correct. This is just for rates. And so from that 2021 federal investment, Washington County got just around $1 million that funneled through the federal government, through the state agencies, and then out to Washington County Community Action. And it was fully subscribed within about 2 to 3 months with the level. So the number of households that contacted Community Action indicating that they were having a difficult time paying their bills, and that we knew Joe did a lot of work in this space, were behind in their bills. to get them caught up. And so we knew that those were households that were struggling to afford their bills, just meeting certain criteria, whether they were SNAP eligible, and a variety of other kind of categorical areas where we knew that they were the neediest of households. I think that is, no, that was not it. So one last on, kind of related, I think, to the conversation, again, because this is Senate Bill 1537, the governor's housing bill. One of the priorities we had was making sure that policies that look to promote housing are protective of public health and the environment, including the Clean Water Act and state water quality standards and requirements, which seems like an obvious statement. But again, in the 2023 legislative session, we did see some legislation introduced that just didn't have clarity that we needed to know that we were going to be able to implement our permit and not have our implementation of our permit for water quality standards conflict with the intent of the legislature as related to delivering on the housing production. And this was really around cities and counties providing variances, so adjustments to certain requirements for housing development. A lot of the things that have been cited are like balconies, for instance, but then there were discussions that were more in the stormwater space. And so we were able to get language included in the governor's bill. The governor's office was really great in working with us on that language. You'll see that on the screen that really makes it very clear that those types of adjustments or variances do not apply and do not impact kind of the implementation of those water quality standards. So just making it crystal clear. Okay. That was the last state priority. So check the time. Okay, so moving into our timeline for the interim. Agency budget work is already starting. We were just talking about DEQ's budget. Their water quality permitting program is a really important item for us, where we want to make sure that we're seeing kind of the right balance of investment for the program. With knowing that there's going to be some permit fee impacts there. So those are conversations that we're having in coordination with Special Districts Association of Oregon, League of Oregon Cities, and the Association of Clean Water Agencies, as DEQ is already in that budget process. Legislative days are scheduled for May 29th to 31st. So that'll be committees coming in, having different hearings on topics. Usually it's a good indication of some of the topics that we may see for the 2025 legislative session. Those legislative days are going to happen also in September, then again in December. Usually those are more in-depth discussions of bigger policy issues. The measure filing request deadline is on my birthday, so you have to submit any request for legislation by September 27th. So that is the date that any good ideas or otherwise are submitted in for drafting as bills. And then the filing deadline, so when you get those drafts back from Legislative Council, those bills would then be officially dropped as legislation that we will see in probably January of the next year. So that's
just
sort of the, yeah.
Give a point of comparison. You mentioned in the short session how many bills there are, which were in the hundreds.
Yes.
In a normal long session, how many can we expect?
Yeah, we'll probably expect between 2,500 to 3,000. So it will most certainly be so, lots of fun to be had. Okay, so unless there's any questions on the state priority items, I'll do a very quick update on our federal legislative agenda. There's a lot of words on this, but it should move pretty quickly. So we had really good news in terms of advocating for additional infrastructure funding. We worked with our federal delegation and Congresswoman Bonamici, included Clean Water Services project, which is the Western Washington County Inflow and Infiltration Rehabilitation Project. They helped us name that one strategically, but it is a project out in Forest Grove primarily to replace aging pipes that are average age about 88 years old out there that have some significant inflow and infiltration issues. So they're leaking and they're getting water that's coming into them as well, which is causing capacity issues at the water resource recovery facility out there. So this funding will help with the local share cost of that project. So we're really, really excited to see that we were included in the final appropriations bill that was just signed into law this past month. So that's really good news. We talked about PFAS, so I will continue to talk about PFAS, but there are efforts underway to provide an exemption for water utilities under what's called CERCLA, which is kind of the super fund law, if you will. And so right now, so under CERCLA, PFAS has been added as a hazardous substance, and that could trigger super fund and also can open up third-party litigation for if you meet certain kind of parameters within that. So it gets into the details, we'll get into the weeds. It's something that Bob or Scott Mansell can talk about, I'm sure. But there is effort for an exemption under that so that there is not exposure to third-party litigation for utilities like Clean Water Services. There was a really fascinating hearing, so if you do have time and you're into this kind of stuff, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee had a hearing on March 20th, and it was really, really an interesting discussion about the pros and potential, considerations about that CERCLA exemption particularly. So we've been working with Senator Merkley's office, he's on the committee, and just sharing information about our pre-treatment program and ways that we're working to address PFAS in our community. On the low-income water assistance piece, so you'll see there's a lot of overlap from state to federal. There is a bill that was introduced. We signed a letter of support for that bill. That would be a permanent program for the low-income water assistance program. So we'll create that program as a permanent going forward. And then the other priority on that slide is, of course, Scoggins. We continue to engage in ongoing efforts with our federal delegation as Bureau of Reclamation works to advance the dam safety project at Scoggins, which is they're doing the work, they're starting the work for the environmental impact statement on that project and expecting construction to start in 2029, I want to say, complete by 2035. So that's going to be ongoing engagement with our federal delegation to make sure that the dam safety program is adequately funded so we don't see any further delays with that project.
Is that $1 billion at this point?
The last year was $900 million is project cost in the latest update, which I will imagine will increase between now and.
Is it funded?
It is not funded specifically, but the funding is flowing through the dam safety program. So the only challenge I could see in that space would be if for some reason Congress stopped making investment in the dam safety program. But really what they do is they have a list of priority projects. We are very high up on that. We are there. And so they are, I mean, the fund, we would not anticipate the fund would not be there. But again, that's why we're doing that work to make sure that our federal delegation continues to push for investment in the dam safety.
Was that you that got that then? Was that you that pushed that through to that level?
To which level?
To get on the priority funding.
Oh, no, I have to credit that to the work of so many people in the region for over the course of 20 years, really to elevate this. I mean, the seismic risk has only been known since, I think, really known since probably 2010 maybe. Yeah. Yeah. And so, no, I wish I could say that, but yeah, no, a lot of really great people have been working on that project for
3 years.
Walton Valley Irrigation District is key, the Joint Water Commission, and the Clean Water Services. So we got it to this point because folks like Mark Joggers and Tom Vanderplan and all of the folks from the irrigation districts made this a priority. So
You got the Army Corps to sign off on it. Did you have to do that?
yeah. So they so right now it's on the priority list, and that's key. You got to get to the top of the list.
And
They decided this is one of the most seismically vulnerable dams that they have in their entire Bureau of Reclamation facility. So they've been committed. So they're in their environmental impact statement phase. So they're investing money, right? So that's what we want to see.
it will remain an earthen dam for a little.
It's Yeah, it's basically they're gonna make it wider, and so if there is a big earthquake, it would slump, but it won't fail. That's the goal.
Lots of material.
Yeah, there you have a bottom. Earth rock. Yeah.
Trucks.
Can I ask, where is the rock coming from?
That's part of your environmental impact statement is to identify the source of the rock. It's a huge amount of rock.
So in the environmental impact statement, will it take account of all the trucks behind it?
Yeah, so they borrow, they, I mean, there's gonna be borrow pits, the Bureau is really looking at where all this. It's gonna be a generational plot. Like, that. You don't often.
It's almost as much money as the big pipe, right?
I do want to say this project, I think, is on our calendar for later this fall, so we'll come and talk to you about that.
Who's doing the environmental impact statement?
The Bureau of Reclamation, the actual Bureau.
It's all reclamation project now versus.
They're experts at it. So they had open houses, we listened in.
Yeah, and we're a cooperating agency in that process. And so, yeah, it's a very different role where it was a joint project potentially, where we were looking for the expansion potential in the past. So now that this is a dam safety only project, we are a cooperating agency. So that has changed the role. And so, yeah, it sounds like you'll be getting an update, and there's so much to cover in that space. So.
About the CERCLA exemption. Can you just send out some links? I don't want to take time at the meeting tonight, but I'd like to have a bit more background about that, because just on the initial sniff test, it's like, why should anybody get exempted from CERCLA?
Yes, the water folks, we believe, we don't generate that
Because you receive it.
Yeah, we don't create it, that it should be the responsibility of whoever is creating it, and using it, so. But you're right, so we can send more information of why that's a concern.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
So only thing I meant you, in New York, you go to some hobbies, and a lot of people who have.
We do have a contract with the federal lobbyist, which is hugely helpful in navigating that process and that world. So on the state side, it's me, and then it's coordination with the other organizations, the Special Districts Association or Association of Clean Water Agencies. They don't really get in the advocacy space. They, as a nonprofit, they try and stay out of that and just provide kind of the technical information into the process. So they do rely on people like LOC, League of Oregon Cities, special districts, and then, of course, utilizing any local governments that have a government relations person like myself. So on the state, it's primarily me, and then we have a federal lobbyist.
Just wondering, is that a more effective way to get it out widespread or stuff so on?
I think it's been an effective strategy so far. It certainly is helpful, the relationship that we have with our federal delegation. And again, that we've had a lot of them have been serving in office for some time. And so we've got these really, really great relationships where they're checking in with us frequently. Like last week, we were invited to a housing roundtable with Congresswoman Bonamici to serve as the water infrastructure voice in that discussion, which again, is appreciated and just part of that relationship that has been built on both sides of the equation. So it seems to be an effective strategy. And again, we've got great members of our federal delegation that we get to work with, which is, we're lucky in that.
Thank you.
Okay, so the last little bit to cover here is our process going forward. So as I mentioned already, in May to July timeframe, we'll be working with DEQ and Association of Clean Water Agencies on the agency budget prioritization process for DEQ. We'll be working with our staff internally to look at last year's legislative agenda, identify areas that we need to continue on with, where we're not done with the work yet, and then any new areas or items that we may look to add to the agenda. And then ongoing education outreach with our state and federal legislators. There is a relatively newly established state legislative water caucus that is comprised of legislators that have an interest in water issues and want to kind of take a deeper dive. And so they have hired on a full-time chief of staff. I'll be meeting with her tomorrow, actually, to talk about doing a tour of clean water service facilities and trying to see what they might be. We have a lot to show, so it's trying to narrow down to what's going to be the most interesting to them. But we'll be doing a lot of education and outreach kind of going into the 2025 legislative session. July into August is when we'll be starting to kind of see that agenda kind of come into focus based off of all those discussions that we have with our staff and that review process. So we flag that as a time potentially to check in with you all and share kind of what's been discussed and what we might be thinking of having as part of that proposed legislative agenda. The DEQ budget will be submitted right around August timeframe. Again, that state legislative concept filing deadline for the 2025 session is in the end of September. And then in September, November is when we have the discussions with our board. And we do that jointly with the county's government relations team as they also look to have their state and federal legislative agendas adopted and finalized. And then in December, we'll see the governor release the governor's recommended budget. And then that kind of officially starts the 2025 legislative session, if you will, because again, we'll see bills coming out in January and then starting up around February timeframe for that long legislative session. I will just note that the process in talking to the county GR team, they're trying to move it forward just a bit because that legislative filing deadline, if they want to bring proactive legislation, they don't want to have a agenda that hasn't been adopted by their board. So I'm waiting to get some more detail about how they may shift that timeline, because that will certainly impact how we approach the timeline. And it makes a lot of sense, of course, to make sure that they're able to be responsive to the deadline if they do need to have legislation requested. And so we will keep you updated on that as well. And, yeah.
What is the difference between the water caucus and the Oregon Water Resource Fund?
The Water Caucus is comprised of legislators. And so they're meeting just regularly and picking topics that they just want to learn more about. So it's self-selected. So they want to be there, which is really nice and encouraging to see. And so there's a lot of the members are on legislative policy committees like the House Ag, Land Use, Natural Resource and Water Committee. You'll see a lot of members there. There's a lot of members on there that aren't on any natural resource related committees. So it's a broader audience of legislators who want to understand water issues.
That can pertain to anything from clean water services to like water rights and like Klamath Basin.
Yeah. So they've got, and I think that they're going to be doing a lot of tours just around the state during the interim just to see different projects and areas. So yeah, that'll be a good opportunity then for us to share what we do. Any other questions?
Just reminding them what the current fund next time, to say no for.
To say what, sorry?
To say no for any of these requests, should remind them of what the kicker fund.
Okay, well.
There's so much left over this year.
That would be something we would probably want to think very carefully about messaging. But yeah, certainly. So hopefully they'll be making some more investments though in water infrastructure. So again, I think we see really good momentum in that space. But so we'll just end with a question that is whether there are any other items that you want additional information on that would help inform as we do that check-in with you for the 2025. As we heard the CERCLA exemption piece, so we'll provide that additional information. But if there are any other areas that we can follow up on.
That's me, this is the last year about how do you prioritize your legislative? How do you go about the legislative items? Priority and what's in it for us? Why? That's all.
And that's, yeah, and that, you know, again, and it's always a kind of a crystal ball exercise too, because we never know really what the legislature is going to bring forward that will impact us potentially. And so we really try and kind of strike a balance in keeping these items broad enough that we can be responsive. I know, for instance, that resiliency piece that we have on there allows us to kind of move and be nimble in that particular issue area, whether it's Emerald Ash Borer, whether it's something that's maybe seismic wildfire risk. You know, there's a number of areas where we can engage in things that will be either beneficial or potentially detrimental for the district. But in terms of that priority process, and again, I think there'll be good opportunity to bring those items that we're contemplating to CWAC. Just say, is there anything that you see that we're missing, or kind of gauge where your priorities are within that space. But again, there's so many times I've entered the legislative session thinking this is my priority, and then there's some bill that I just didn't even know was coming, and then it takes all of my time and energy and political capital to make sure that particular thing can be addressed. So it's a tricky thing to be able to predict, you know, and to be able to prioritize in a way that's going to be reflective of what actually happens. Yeah.
So this isn't really as clean water services related as maybe to the SWCD, but the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Fund. I know that there are local farmers that are trying to do succession planning, and they reach out to the SWCD, and I remember a conversation with someone there who mentioned that the Heritage Fund had not been funded. Do you happen to know if the SWCDs, the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts, were they at the legislature? They get this? Because, I mean, it might be something that our partners at Tualatin and the SWCD might want to know about.
I will check to be sure. I do think that they had indicated some support through that process, but I'll verify that.
Our guest just chatted. No, that she's obviously, she's going to be on soon, but she's very tied to the agricultural company. So maybe now I just said.
Nellie McAdams has a chat comment that says it was funded at 5.8 million. I can share info with you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll follow up on that as well, just to make sure that there's that coordination with the water conservation district. Thank you.
Now we'll move into the final agenda, well, final, but we're gonna invite for public comment. I believe we have one guest.
Thank you, Chairman. We do have a guest on the line. I'll have them on audio here just 1 minute.
Great. Good. Have the guests introduce themselves, and a reminder that limited to a 2-minute time frame.
My name is Nellie McAdams with Farmland First. I'm happy to do this in 2 minutes, but if you want me to talk about Oregon Ag Heritage, I would just request extra time so I didn't cut into my prepared comment.
Rob. Go ahead and have you use your 2 minutes on your time.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide public comment. Last week, several CWS staff members graciously spent time explaining the West Basin Master Plan process to me and several others. And I'm very grateful for their time and for the expertise that they and CWS bring to the regional wastewater and conservation planning throughout the county. I just wanted to make 2 recommendations in regards to the West Basin Master Plan's current geographic scope. First, it's my understanding that CWS only has jurisdiction to plan for land within urban growth boundaries and land designated urban reserve or undesignated. However, the draft plan at this time includes 1,800 acres northwest of Hillsborough and land north of Highway 26 from Hillsborough near Helvetia that does not fall under those categories. That land is designated rural reserve, but was labeled former urban reserve, I believe, by Hillsborough. That is not a land use designation, and regardless of Hillsborough's ambitions to incorporate this land into their UGB, it's currently out of CWS's jurisdiction, if my understanding is correct. And for that reason, I recommend that this land is removed from that planning process. Second, while CWS has the authority to plan for undesignated land, there is not a justification for it to include all of the undesignated land around the city of North Plains in the 10-year plan. North Plains has requested roughly half of its undesignated land to be included in its UGB, and that UGB has yet to be finalized. But even if it is finalized, that plan is a 20-year plan, and twice the duration of, my understanding, the duration of the West Basin Master Plan of 10 years. Therefore, the remaining undesignated land that's not included in the UGB expansion proposal would not be incorporated in the timeframe of the CWS plan and should not be included in that plan. And I raise these concerns not to nitpick, believe me, but just because I've seen such infrastructure plans not only designed for services that are designated for growth, but spur development and study areas that might not have happened otherwise. Whether intentional or not, planning for land that may or may not have been developed but for the plan makes development there more likely. It encourages land speculation, inflating prices beyond agricultural value and weakening the existing agricultural economy. These plans are often cited as justification in future UGB expansion proposals, and including more land than is needed can result in infrastructure cited farther into land proposed for annexation than would otherwise be the case. And that slingshots development farther and farther out. While future annexations are not CWS's responsibility, for the sake of your conservation objectives alone, I would ask that CWS be mindful of the tail wagging the dog effect of wastewater planning in areas outside of UGBs, and that you limit the scope of the study areas to land that is within your jurisdiction and likely to enter a UGB within the plan period. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Nellie. It's noted. And do we want to allow the follow-up for Elaine's question on for that, your question on the
Yeah,
budget?
for the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Fund. Now, this is Elaine Stewart. I'm one of the members of CWAC, and I'm most interested to ensure that Nicole Ruggiero at Walton SWCD is aware that there has been some funding, or there will be funding provided to that program, because they have some farmers trying to do succession planning, knocking on their door, and she's trying to help come up with resources.
Thank you, Elaine, and members of the commission. I am in close contact with Nicole, and I can definitely make sure that she knows that that program was funded. The commission will be meeting in the next couple of weeks to decide how they're distributing those funds between Oregon Ag Heritage programs, 4 different grant programs. Nicole also, part of her work includes working lands conservation easements, where she compensates landowners in exchange for development rights that they wouldn't need if they were keeping the land in agricultural production. Tualatin SWCD has captive capital for that program, so they haven't need to pull on grant resources like Oregon Ag Heritage Program quite as much, but she's closely involved in the policy related to that type of conservation. And so I'll make sure that she knows about funding availability for all of the different grant programs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nellie. Joel, if you could give us announcements.
Sure, I have a few, but maybe before I get to the announcements, Ashley, I had mentioned that maybe you have an opportunity as first time being here on CWAC as a new member. Tell us a little bit about your background and about yourself.
I grew up in Hillsborough. My family moved here in the early 90s, so I've been a long time resident. I went to school in California, studied environmental engineering. I got my undergrad and master's degree at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. Right out of college, I started working at Intel. I've been there about 13 years now. I was doing wastewater compliance for our Walnut Acres facility for the first 5 years or so. And then the 8 years, I've been doing modeling and projections for what our wastewater is going to look like in the future, not just for the sites in Oregon, but across the world. We have manufacturing all over the place. And we have some new facilities that we're working on building as well that are getting help figure out what our wastewater treatment's going to look like there. So I work closely with some of the people who work at the Rock Creek facility in wastewater treatment, and that's really my passion is wastewater and making sure our water is clean enough. My kids will say, like, I say, what's my number one job? To keep me safe, and then what's my number two job? And they say, keep the water clean. So water is definitely a passion of mine. I'm excited to be joining the sport and getting to learn a little bit more about the other side as well.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome.
I appreciate all the work so far.
How was the last?
What?
How was the last?
No, I'm after you.
Thank you. I met some people over here.
So just a few announcements for the commission. There's not a CWAC meeting in May. There is a budget meeting, as Kathy said earlier, on May 9th, and many of you will be participating as members of the budget committee. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 12th, so you get a little bit of a break as a commission. So, thank you. Perfect.
And you've hired the new Mark.
Yes, so our new chief of staff, her name is Elizabeth Edwards. She'll be starting on May 20th. So Joe's gonna have a companion we look forward to introducing her to CWAC.
Very excited. Congratulations, though.
Hope that email update was helpful.
Yes, it was.
It was, I just flagged it in case folks didn't catch it.
We got a postcard from Mark from Australia.
Yeah.
He actually came back. We didn't think he would. It's one of his posts. It's so much fun. I'm like, he's never leaving Australia.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I had lunch with him today and there's some projects.
Good.
Good. Awesome. Well, with that, everyone, thank you for your time this evening. We're going to wrap it up ahead of schedule. So with that, I'll adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
There you go.